If nothing else, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg is one of the most rhetorically proficient and communicatively effective politicians in the United States, which makes him an excellent surrogate for both the Biden administration and the Democratic Party in general. When he goes into the media for interviews, he hands Republicans L after L after L, and recently was no exception because he pushed back on recent comments made by MAGA Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert and the Republican Speaker of the House, who also recently happened to write a foreword to a disgusting book full of conspiracy theories and homophobic slurs, some of which were directed at Buttigieg himself. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. All right, folks, I have several clips to play. We're going to start with that last part first because a book was, I think it was called The Revivalist Manifesto. It was written by a guy named Scott McKay, who is basically a conspiracy theorist. He's a proponent of the Pizzagate conspiracy, which was basically the predecessor to the QAnon conspiracy theory, this idea that the Democratic Party is a cabal of Satan-worshiping pedophiles. And he's also a bigot. And he happened to use homophobic slurs in his book, many of which were directed at Secretary Buttigieg, who is openly gay and married with kids. And then Speaker Mike Johnson just last year wrote the foreword to that book. And here, Pete is asked to address it.
The Speaker, Mike Johnson, wrote the foreword for the book, as you know. And in the foreword, he says, Buttigieg is a rather queer choice for Transportation Secretary, not just because he's a member of the LGBTQ community, and obnoxiously so. Okay, he says that. Then he writes about your 2020 campaign. Buttigieg ran on the fact that he is openly and obnoxiously gay, the central precept of his campaign being that Christians objecting to his lifestyle were bad at religion, while he is not. All right, that's in the book. And in his foreword to this, Mike Johnson calls the book, and I quote, a valuable and timely contribution. What's your reaction even to that?
Where do you even start with this, right? It's 2023, I guess 2022 when the book came out. And we're still talking about people this way based on who they are, who they love. America, most of America at least, has moved on from this kind of thing. And what's obnoxious is the idea that you can be coming back to race or sexuality as this author does constantly. Not just the way he talks about me, but the way he talks about cabinet colleagues of mine, all kinds of things that mostly seem to come back to an obsession with identity, with either who you're married to or what your race is, and very little, certainly very little of use about how to make this country a better place.
That's not exactly surprising. That's an indictment of the modern Republican Party in general, okay? It's nothing new. This is a party that has run out of valuable ideas, if they ever had them to begin with, in terms of addressing the material concerns of the country writ large, let alone their own individual constituency. And the other thing that Secretary Buttigieg points out, which I find interesting, is the right always talks about how the left and the Democrats, as their political proxies, are obsessed with identity politics, when in fact identity and politics have always been correlated. I mean, they're helixed inevitably. But even in the way that the right describes, Republicans and right-wingers are at least as obsessed with identity politics as Democrats or people on the left. It's just an absolute hypocrisy. The other thing that Secretary Buttigieg points out is, for the most part, the American people have moved past questions about gay marriage, and that is true. The overwhelming majority of the American people support, the right, for example, of gay people to marry. Now, we have seen a dip, in particular in the last few years, among Republicans, okay? So even though the trend is still upwards, we've seen a bit of a decline in terms of the acceptance of gay marriage among the Republican Party. So it seems to be that the homophobic element of the GOP is starting to galvanize, hopefully not to an alarming extent, although I guess to any extent is pretty alarming. But Mike Johnson, who is the most powerful elected Republican, I mean, he is a strident homophobe. He's a religiously motivated homophobe, which is another reason why we can't allow Mike Johnson to not only remain Speaker, but we certainly can't make things worse by electing Republican majorities in the Senate or in the White House, because then they'd be in a position to execute a homophobic agenda. Now, Secretary Buttigieg's criticism of Mike Johnson doesn't end there. So Mike Johnson was actually recently at an airport expansion in Sarasota, Florida, and we're going to get to why that is important in just a second. But during his tour of the expansion, he criticized Secretary Buttigieg, and we'll get to that.
Well, Congress has a role to play in ensuring that these disruptions don't happen, and we're trying to be good stewards of that and perform that duty well. And that's why, as I mentioned in our bill, the FAA reauthorization, is once every 5 years. This time around, we put some important reforms in there. We want to build up the supply of pilots that are available, and obviously we need some reform at the TSA. I'm not delighted in the way that Secretary Buttigieg has run the Transportation Department. I think there's let's say, to be charitable, it's left much to be desired. But
He doesn't actually go on to address like any specific criticisms, not to say that they don't exist, like good faith criticisms, but Johnson doesn't list any. And because Johnson is such a strident homophobe, and I'm not particularly inclined to be charitable to Republican elected politicians because they don't deserve it, who knows? The much to be desired comment may just refer to the fact that Buttigieg isn't straight, and that might bother Mike Johnson. Buttigieg responded on Twitter saying, spoken while touring an airport project that we selected for funding from President Biden's infrastructure bill that Speaker Johnson voted against, and after voting twice this year alone to slash air traffic control budgets. This is, to put it charitably, unserious. But then he had the opportunity to address Mike Johnson's hypocrisy during a video interview as well.
We saw the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, just the other day with Representative Vern Buchanan. Both of them were touring an airport terminal project in Sarasota that our department approved for funding through President Biden's infrastructure law. They apparently saw no irony in celebrating that project, even though they had voted no on the package that funded it. So, look, we know that these are good projects because even the people who tried to block them are here to celebrate them. It's an example of what it means to show that we're about the bread and butter of governing. We're not about the chaos. We're not about the drama. We're not about the partisan politics. We're about getting stuff done, including fixing roads, bridges, tunnels, trains, airports, ports, and all the other things we've been working on so hard as an administration, especially since President Biden signed that historic bill 2 years ago.
He's 100% correct. And we talked about this before, that the Transportation Department actually has this interactive map that you can use. It covers all 50 states. It's the United States, where you can see individual projects in every aspect of infrastructure that are part of the bipartisan infrastructure law that, again, Mike Johnson and others oppose. Now, this last one I'll throw in here, too, because I mentioned in the beginning that Pete Buttigieg also called out MAGA Republican Lauren Boebert, who also rails against President Biden's agenda, yet seems happy to take advantage of its fruits. So this is him addressing her.
And part of how we know that these achievements are really phenomenal and delivering good results for the American people is that even Republican members of the House who voted to prevent them are still there to celebrate them when they actually happen. Representative Boebert has written letters of support for projects in her district to be funded with President Biden's infrastructure package that she didn't just vote no on, but referred to as garbage. That didn't stop her from saying that garbage, I guess, as she had called it, was going to be good for her district. And sure enough, you know, when the project is a good project, we're going to fund it, regardless of the politics. So we're doing a project on I-70. We're doing another one that is benefiting the city of Pueblo and helping it reconnect the kinds of highway, road, and street improvement projects that motivated President Biden to fight so hard to get that infrastructure package done in the first place.
Again, a great point. And we talked about this because President Biden went out to Pueblo, Colorado recently, which is part of Lauren Boebert's district, to tout the successes of his, not just the bipartisan infrastructure law, but the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS and Science Act, et cetera, and so forth. This is huge. Okay, we need to see more of this. Maybe not every day, but constant, frequent, not in between 6 months. The president, Secretary Buttigieg, their surrogates in the media have to constantly hammer, especially as we head into an election cycle, the Biden accomplishments, because facts don't speak for themselves. Every day, people they have jobs and family and friends and hobbies. Like, they don't keep an ongoing tabulation of the successes and failures of a presidential administration the way that I do, right? So you have to constantly remind them. And if you don't remind them, then their perceptions can be shaped either by ignorance, like literally just not knowing, or short-term memory because they forget, or the bad faith reinterpretation of right-wing activists and in the media and in politics. So Biden and Buttigieg and everybody else have to constantly be talking about this and pointing out the hypocrisy. Boebert, as we talked about, she's running for reelection, in a purple state, and she barely won reelection in 2022. She won by like a margin of 500 votes. And right now, her challenger is out fundraising her by a factor of 4. So imagine the persuasive case. He's already got the money on his side. If he and Biden and others are out there saying, by the way, these projects that are benefiting the local economy, they're stimulating economic growth, that are creating good paying jobs, they would not be here if Lauren Boebert had her way. And we have the receipts and just constantly hammer that home. So anyway, I love this. Pete Buttigieg, again, is one of the finest surrogates of the Democratic Party's accomplishments and, the Biden administration in particular. So we need to see more of this. Let me know what you think in the comments.